Hello and welcome to In the Making, a series of conversations from North Bennett Street School where we connect with a range of new voices, fields, and perspectives. Before we get into our conversation, we want to thank the many supporters that make our programs possible, including the Massachusetts Cultural Council and our partners in craft. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Kristen Odell. I'm an NBSS staff member and host of In the Making. Today, our guests are calling in from England and possibly very nearing their bedtime. So I'm really grateful that you're here with us. Thank you. Zoe Wilson, stone carver, and William Barsley, woodcarver, met as students at the City and Guilds of London Art School. Somehow, coincidentally, after schooling, traveled basically to the same places, researching carving techniques all around the world, and are now both based in the UK, where they've carved out a career in their fields, pun intended. Thank you both for being with us this afternoon and evening. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
First question, let's just get us started. How did you meet at City and Guilds of London Art School, and what do you most appreciate about the school and your studies?
I'll take this one. Thanks so much for having us on. It's a real honor. So I met Zoe. Zoe was the year above me at the City and Guilds London Art School. The carving course is split into stone and wood. So Zoe was obviously doing the stone side of it, and I was doing the wood. And you do a lot of the same classes together. So whether that's clay modeling or drawing. So there's quite a really nice overlap. There's not too much separation between the departments. And yeah, Zoe was carving an amazing big cartouche, I think, at the time, and was kind of a real mentor to a lot of the younger students coming in. She was kind of doing this amazing work and also had a fantastic scholarship through the Queen Elizabeth's Trust, which she told us all about. In terms of the school, I think I appreciated the size. It was very small, family kind of focused. And also the carvers we had in were different every day. So they were practicing wood carvers or stone carvers, and they could give you a real idea of what it's like to run a business. So you had a different person each day. So you can you're not stuck down kind of one avenue of thinking. And that was really exciting. Yeah, how about you, Zoe?
Yeah, I think hearing you say about the size, I hadn't thought about that, but actually I moved from quite a small town to London and found that process mildly overwhelming. And the fact that City and Guilds was so small was really nice because it felt like such a close-knit community. It felt very safe and comfortable. And actually that makes a really big difference when you're learning that you're in an environment that you feel comfortable in. So I definitely agree with that. And I think the other thing that I found really special about the course was it's been running for such a long time. They've clearly really honed in on how to teach somebody to what to carve and to sculpt. And so a lot of it was teaching our eyes to understand what we were seeing. So using clay, but even if we were in a life drawing class, we might get swapped and it might be a sketch modeling class, and you'd have sort of, I don't know, half a minute or a minute to try and capture the essence of what the pose was. And it was exercises like that that I think maybe took quite a lot of us out of our comfort zones, but really taught us to understand form and shape and to translate what we were seeing into the stone, the wood, the clay. And I think actually how specific the course was really satisfying.
Was there one for each of you? Was there one way of learning that initially that spoke to you more than something that did sketch work for you versus the 2D clay modeling? What form of that worked best for your brain?
So the thing that I realized whilst I was there, or I discovered whilst I was there, is I would never have described myself as a particularly good drawer. It wouldn't be something, in fact, if you asked me, can you draw? I'd probably say no. I can, but it's not something that I've ever found I've been particularly comfortable with. And I think at art school before, that there'd been quite an importance put on drawing. And I distinctly remember having this sort of epiphany that the thing I found difficult was translating a 3-dimensional object into a 2-dimensional drawing. So when we started doing life drawing, I found that really hard, trying to capture a body onto a flat piece of paper. But as soon as I started trying to do it with clay, I found it much easier. And so I found it interesting, if we were looking at a photograph or an image, I found that much easier to translate into, so 2D to 2D I'm fine with, and 3D to 3D I'm fine with. I still struggle with crossing over the 2D to 3D side. Yeah, definitely
Yeah,
for
I'm
me.
the same. It was such a big leap starting on the drawing, I think, and it's kind of that functionality just helped to kind of unlock it. You're not just drawing a pretty picture. It's like it's a tool, isn't it? And that was a really nice big step.
Mm. Let me ask you both about your chosen materials. What led you to choose your specific materials, and how do you feel they resonate with your creative identity? And let me pause before you answer to our guests. We're going to share a little slideshow after this so that you can actually have context for what their work is. I just want to get that question out there first. So about your materials.
Will, do you want to lead with that one? I'm
Yeah,
sort of
sure.
thinking.
So wood. I guess I just grew up doing woodwork. My dad did a lot of woodwork. I did a lathe course with him when I was 10, and that was quite a nice introduction. Whether that kind of stayed in my mind beyond, I'm not sure, but that with a lathe, you get such instant results. I really enjoyed that. And probably more as well the accessibility. So you can pick up a stick and start whittling, or it just felt very accessible and warm, and so it kind of stuck with me. And actually, it probably wasn't till the college that I was like, oh, you can do stone carving too. I'd obviously seen stone carving, and they do encourage you to do a bit of both. So I did some stone carving at college, which was just amazing. I was like, there's no grain. I can just go anywhere unless you hit the edge and it pops off, which is a nightmare. But so that was really nice. So that's probably why I've gone down that route. But the college opened my eyes to they had a foundry, a print studio. We got to do stone carving, so it's just great. That kind of real 3D modeling aspect, which was good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I ever actually chose stone. I was just thinking how to answer that. I started working with stone slightly out of necessity for a job. And I got a job
Explain
making...
that.
Yeah. So I did a degree in fine art painting, which I actually really disliked at the time because it was very conceptual. And it was through my frustration on the degree course that I learned that actually I was a maker. And I wasn't so much interested in why I was painting something blue or what form I was using. I was much more interested in the practicalities of how to do it. So it was after that I was just looking for a job, and one of the jobs was making granite kitchen work surfaces, which I said yes to. And that was the first time I'd been in a proper workshop environment, and I just absolutely adored it. So I didn't really choose stone. It's just then, because I was working with stone, I had these sort of serendipitous moments where I had the opportunity to do an apprenticeship with a stonemason, which I said yes to, and that was great. And so it, for me, probably also wasn't really until college that I suddenly felt like I was doing the right thing, you know. But I definitely, I don't think there was a sort of decisive moment for me where I wanted to be a stone carver or to work with stone particularly. I did try wood carving and I thought it was awful because I couldn't stand the grain. So much more difficult.
Both of you have chosen materials that you are one and done. You can't, once something is removed, it's not going back. I mean, what's your feeling about that? Is that part of the joy of doing this work?
I mean, absolutely. For me, I'm going to jump in there, Will, sorry. It's probably my favorite thing about the material. I think it might also be because increasingly we're so used to having an undo button. And I think it's just great to have to slow down and to know that your decisions are final, and you have to sort of, you have to make peace with yourself in a very different way when you're making a final decision. And if it doesn't go how you're expecting it to, is that you making a mistake, or is that the material is slightly different in that place? And I think it definitely encourages me to be quite calm and mindful. And yeah, I think particularly in a world that's so busy and fast, the fact for me that it's slow and permanent is just, yeah, I think that's the best bit actually.
I really enjoy the variability within the material. So the different types of wood, obviously, you have to kind of get your head into what you're using for a specific job, but even within the same type of wood. So I'm carving some oak at the moment, and it's just like amazing, and it's just so much easier, so much nicer to carve. And that's not just because it's been seasoned nicely. It's just sometimes you've got to really figure out the piece that you're working with, and I quite enjoy that variability and trying to kind of understand the section of timber you have and how it's going to behave as well.
I don't know if you do, Will, but I suspect you feel the same as I do about your material. That somebody said to me it was a bit like characters in a book, that you, like if I'm working with slate, I will have a rough idea as to what the Welsh slate is going to be like. But as you say, you get to know the individual piece of stone or wood that you're working on. And because you work with one piece for quite a long time, if it's a slow process, you really get to know the characteristics of that particular stone. And I think as a maker, you also build up a relationship with that particular, that particular piece. And I think that's a really special thing to be able to do.
I'm going to jump our slideshow in here and line it up with a sensitive question around the joy in your work. So let me cue this up first and show our audience what we're actually talking about, what you all make. And if you want to talk about, so obviously anything in wood in here is Will's piece, anything in stone is Zoe's. And I just want to hear so the question is around themes that we're working with in this school this year around meaningful work and joy in our work. And so looking through these very few slides, I want to hear, where do you find joy in your craft? And did you experience a lack of fulfillment in your work before pursuing these crafts?
So for me, I did a desk-based job before. And yeah, naturally just craved something much more practical. I'd been carving as a hobby, and yeah, just was really tired of sitting behind the desk. And then that's kind of what started a little bit of my traveling. So kind of traveling and documenting wood carving in other countries. So coming from a bit of a livelihood perspective of how people make a living abroad carving, and that's kind of my introduction into kind of doing it as a career. But for me, a lot of the joy comes in the problem solving kind of side of it. There comes a point, as I'm sure a lot of you makers would know, where everything becomes possible. For quite a long time, you're figuring out, oh my God, can I make this piece? And you're still trying to figure out where are the components. And then there's a switch where you know it's all possible, and you're kind of working towards the end. And then that kind of satisfaction of finishing something and being happy with it, although you always know the various bits you'd like to improve. And then I think actually a bit of a funny one, but the biggest joy I get out of carving is that I can listen to stuff. So my workshop is rarely quiet, and a lot of audiobooks and all sorts of stuff. And I look back my folders of pieces I've finished, and I can instantly know what I was listening to. It's almost like ingrained into, again, pun, ingrained into kind of that piece. I can kind of, that's a moment in time where I'm like, it can transport me back, a bit like music does with lots of people's memories. So yeah, listening. My wife gets so grumpy that I can just listen to all of this stuff, whereas she's a desk-based job, and it's very hard to do that in an office, to blast out an audiobook or a bit of music.
Do you find that one thing enhances the other? Or is that, or are you just the type of person that just wants to digest a bunch of things all at once?
Yeah, it does help. And also, I remember our lettering tutor being really strict on music. He wanted complete silence, but it was about the consistency. So that's where an audiobook's good, is that it's kind of usually fairly same tone. If you've got kind of music that's really up and down in how it is working, then it's kind of, you want to find that zen. So you could listen to a book and you don't really notice you're kind of working sometimes.
Mm. Zoe,
Yeah,
what about you?
it's really interesting listening to Will talking about that. I actually mostly work in silence as a contrast. I very much get what you're saying though. If I was listening to music, which I don't often admit, but at college in my final year, I just listened to the same album on repeat for pretty much the whole year. Which sounds quite potty, I know, but I think it's because of what Will was saying, that it was the same pitch, the same tone, and I wasn't really thinking about it. But also college was quite a loud environment. And so I think the music helped me to be in my own zone. Whereas now, because I have the luxury of having my own studio, I actually really, really like it being just still and quiet. And I find that kind of the opposite. I think the joy for me is when the decision making's happened. So it's all planned out for me beforehand. And so it's a little bit like, I think it's amazing watching one of your ideas come to life. And particularly when it's in a 3-dimensional form, you're making something and you're sort of delivering it into the world. And I think that's quite it's quite addictive. So a little bit like maybe doing a jigsaw puzzle and you think, oh, I'll just put one more piece in. I'll just do another piece. I'll just do another piece. And all of a sudden I find that, 2 hours has flown by, but I really don't want to stop. Because if you look at the right image here, I just want to carve another section to see what that looks like. Or I just want to finish this little bit to see what that little pattern looks like. And you're watching this thing evolve and come to life. And that's, I don't know, I find that really amazing when it's been something that's just been living in your head, to actually have the skills and the time to be able to make it is, it's quite fascinating.
Do you think you get that more with geometric work? Because each of those shapes is now finished, right? Whereas when you're doing 3D sculptural work, you rough it out, you go layer, 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 and sometimes
well, that's a really good point. I'd never thought about that.
Every single section is now done, right? Unless you go over the end and kind of like.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also it's very easy for me to know when a piece is completed because I finish each segment and move on to the next segment. I'm very sort of strict about that it's completed that segment and then on to the next. And so when I finish, it's very clear cut because there's one piece left to do. And once that piece is done, it's done. I don't go back over it. But Will, you're absolutely right. I'd never thought about that. And actually, when I'm carving the rope knot that you saw a couple of images back, I don't enjoy that nearly as much. It's a commission that keeps raising its head. And they're fun, and I kind of like it as a contrast. But there's so much decision making that happens the whole time. I find them really exhausting.
Yeah, you need that form first, whereas the sphere the sphere, right? And you're carving into it, so you haven't got to.
So let me ask you a question about that. It's a commission that keeps on rearing its head. What's an object that the two of you have made once that just keeps coming around and around, and you're sort of like, it's a little bread and butter for you, but it's a little tired.
It's that rope knot for me. That was a carving competition at college with Will, and the theme was the Thames. And we could carve anything out of a lump of Bath stone, which is quite soft. And we had 2 days to carve it. And we knew about the topic beforehand. And I'd racked my brains and I'd asked my dad to make me in fact, I have it here, which is I'd asked him to make me a rope knot. This is the rope original to the right dimensions. And then I spent my 2 days carving it. And I then got a number of commissions to make more after that. And I probably now make maybe 3 a year, 4 a year, something like that. And I've learned that I need to pace them. I tried making 3 in a row at one point. I got so bored.
Just made you crazy. Yeah.
Oh God, it was
what about you, Will? What's something in your catalog that you just keep being asked to make?
Yeah, so the only one I've really got is the angels. So I do them made to order. So I sell them through the House of Parliament shop. So I spent about a year and a half helping to repair Westminster Hall, which is this medieval part of the House of Parliament, made in about 1390. And these angels were about, the originals are still there. They're about 8 or 9 foot, and we were helping to repair sections of the angels which had been broken or stuff had started falling down. And I always wanted to make a full size one because I'd just been repairing small elements. So yeah, made one, then approached there's a kind of a gift shop or part of the Parliament shop and just said, hey, are you interested in selling these? And then kind of 3 years later, after lots of kind of chats and developments, now I make them to order. So an order would come in and I carve an angel, and we've just launched a series of casts now. So that's slightly separate, but that's some smaller casts. But yeah, these ones I carve in, and I really enjoy it actually. It's because it's all in my head now. I haven't got to look at drawings, and I can just carve. And for what I'm doing with the commission side of things, that's quite rare. I very rarely do the same thing again, um, which is lovely sometimes. But sometimes you just want to carve without, you know, worrying too much about
Hmm.
where things are going. So yeah,
So about that, are you matching spec every single time, or is there variation through all of these that you're making to sell?
so this angel is based off a specific one in the hall. There's
Is it
26
this? Is
angels.
it
That's right.
this?
Look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So this one has a little smile on its face, which I quite liked. Um, Now I modeled all of the drapery, hand position, and face kind of off this specific angel, whereas each one is slightly different, although the composition is the same. They're all holding the shield, which is Richard II's shield, and they all have these medieval clouds around the bottom. But how the carver carved it was slightly different. Um, so yeah, it all pretty much stays on track with this one design because that's what people are ordering. But sometimes I might do some sections deeper or change things up a little bit on the lions' faces, for example.
A question about when you know your work is done. Like Zoe just said, the stone, the material sort of just dictates when it's done. Like you can't, a facet is cut and the line is clear. How do you know, Will, when something is done? Because in your carving, and this might be a naive take on this because I'm not a wood carver, but there are still facets, there's still flat facets on your carving. So is that you're matching a historical replica, or is that, if you had all the time in the world, would you go the next step further and be rounding everything off? Like, when do you
Mm.
know that it's done?
That has evolved over time, and that's where the business side of it comes in, is that you're right, you could just spend forever on a piece and then yeah, you wouldn't make any money at all,
That's
which is
right.
kind of that really tricky side of it where at college in our final year you do a final year piece, and I mean it's like you've got a whole year to do this one piece and it's just amazing. You've got all the time in the world and tutors and it's great, but
How much
yeah,
time
when
did you
you
spend rushing at the end, though, Will? Because I definitely spent a
yeah.
lot of time rushing at the
I
end.
know. Well, that's it. It's always suddenly creeps up, but it's when someone's paid for, yeah, for that commission, it's like, well, you need to know when to say that's enough, but also the quality is there. It's always a carved finish with the angels as well, so I don't sand anything, and
Mhm.
yeah, you just get to know when that's done and when you've done it justice. You don't want the customer to have anything, below par, but also you do need to not hold on to it because otherwise yeah, that's kind of money lost.
Yeah. Can you just tell us what we're looking at here before I close out the slideshow? This is amazing.
Complicated jigsaw.
Yeah.
So this was a big coat of arms I had to do recently for he was a lord actually, but he had also got an OBE and an MBE, so he had the medal coming down and then the circlet behind the shield. Considering you don't want to do it out of one piece because there's so much short grain and it was such a big piece. If this was smaller, it would have been achievable in just kind of
Tell us how
laminate.
big. Tell us how big. I have
So it
no
was
sense of
about
scale.
a meter by a
Wow.
meter, roughly. Um, but particularly the sections coming out of the helm, which is called mantling, which is kind of meant to replicate fabric. yeah, there would have been so much short grain that I had to try and joint in a few elements, and then also made it a bit easier to carve. So, for example, the photo on the left, you can see the shield, so I could run that through the bandsaw, and I don't have to carve too much timber away. I can just plane it to my depth, and same for the circle. Then piecing it all together is interesting. I mean, I kind of just figured it out as I went. It's kind of, I'd probably do things slightly different again. But on the flip side as well, this was all painted and gilded. So a lot of heraldry is painted and gilded because the colors are very meaningful. And so it actually meant when I painted and gilded those elements, it was a lot easier because I could, you know, the bees, for example, are all gold. So I could just make sure the gold all goes onto that and not onto the shield. Whereas if that was glued onto the shield, it's just, you're there trying to not get it on the shield, and then you sneeze, it goes everywhere, and you know, stuff like that. That made it a lot easier.
Back to why you should be using gold paint.
Yes, I know, I need this gold paint, definitely.
So these are things that are so interesting to me when I hear you, you know when to stop, which you kind of have to as a craftsperson because you have to get it out the door and make your money. And then the process of what goes on first in this application. Where did you learn for both of you? Did you learn these things in your schooling or from an instructor or a mentor, or just trial and error of making?
I think there's a lot more of this type of construction that goes on with wood carving. To be honest, stone carving in comparison seems quite simple. You might have to, I guess it depends on what you're doing. You might have to sculpt or shape the form first before you carve it. But with stone carving, you're nearly always just working with one piece of stone. So like I say, there might be some shaping that goes on, but there's not much kind of construction and building up which happens with that. So I think probably that's more specifically for wood carving, I guess.
Well, I kind of just mean the business pieces of it. I mean, how you, and we'll get to this in a second about, watching out for the non-linear moments in your career, but to know when to stop and get your work out the door. I mean, is that something that you've just learned through time and practice, or I don't know. I'm just curious about.
Yes, I guess I feel now that I'm educated enough within my industry to know what a good job is. And I also know within myself how far I need to take it so that I'm satisfied and happy with it. And I know that I have quite an exacting eye. And so I think for me, it's a moment of, am I happy with that? Am I happy with somebody else looking at it? Can anyone else pick holes in it? And if the answer to those things is all, no, like I'm happy with it. I'm okay if somebody runs their eye down that V cut, is it straight? Then for me, that's done. So I think it's just making sure I always, I guess, quality control check my own work. But I think it would almost be impossible as a maker not to do that because you take pride in what you're doing.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you about Zoe. You recently collaborated with a perfumery on bottle design. I see them behind your head there. Can you share how that collaboration came about and what it brought to your work?
Yeah, sure. It was actually through the village that I live in. It's a perfume brand called Memoirs Perfume, and the owner of the company lives in the same village that I live in. And we were actually at the pub, and we were discussing how fun it would be to collaborate because she was talking in such great detail about the perfume and actually just building the smell. And I realized what a craft it was. And I was suddenly entering into conversations where we were drawing comparisons between smell and stone or smell and carving. And it's really interesting. I think whenever you speak to another maker, there's so many similarities about how we view our materials. And for her material was a scent. And yeah, we were discussing the process of her bottle caps, and she actually was looking for a new manufacturer. So they're made in a material called jesmonite, which is gypsum and resin. So it's a pourable substance. It's kind of like fake stone, if you like, and it can be coloured, and it's a great material. And she needed a new person to be making her molds for her. And so I recommended the lady who makes my molds. And so we got discussing it. And then we talked about this collaboration. And it was really interesting taking it from that initial conversation to ideas about, how many bottles we'd produce, what the theme would be. And Holly really liked the fact that I work almost exclusively with British stone. And she really liked the idea of keeping the colours really neutral, because quite a lot of her perfume bottles are quite bright. And so I have this one, which is based on a Scottish red sandstone. This one, which is based on, I don't know if you see that in this slide, Portland limestone. This one, which is Welsh slate in the grey. And then this one, which is a slightly more purpley colour, which is heather slate. And so she really liked the fact that they were colours taken from nature. And then we discussed,
so beautiful.
It's a really fun, different thing to do. And we discussed the fragrances weren't like definitively masculine or feminine, but there were some smells that we felt were bolder. And so she very nicely got me in. I think we had 8 fragrances at the beginning. And she was happy for me to choose the 4 that I felt were the most, made a collection, which was really fun. And there was some which I felt were maybe more masculine or certainly stronger. And so I then tried to think about how I would design something based on smell, which is not something I'd sort of had to think about before. And so I wanted to make the geometric patterns different on each one, but equally kind of hang together as a group. So I chose sort of different points to work around, or different sides to carve, and tried to keep it so that the masculine one, or the sort of more dominant fragrances, were a little more bold, and then the feminine ones were a little less bold.
It's so great. And one of the reasons this is so important, and I wanted you to share this, is here, getting students to open their minds to the other abstract things that might come their way through the line of their craft or trade, to just keep a broad perspective on what's available. We all set out to stay on this line of, I'm going to make furniture for the rest of my life, and God willing that happens, but it's, we all know that's a difficult thing. So talking about non-linear pathways through craft, and catching something in the pub is like, that's probably one of the best places to find that out. But can you, so a non-linear experience for you, Zoe, could be considered this. Will, do you have something non-linear in your career, something unexpected that expanded your reach or changed the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, so recently it's kind of on the angels theme, but we've just launched a series of casts, so similar to Zoe exploring kind of other avenues. But there it's kind of interesting. I guess my lesson or takeaway was I took a gamble. I carved some pieces, a small angel, one of the lions off the shield, and shield itself, and carved it, cast it, and then I went to the shop and said, look, I think these could do really well. It's a lower price point, more accessible. I really like them. And then it kind of trying to talk through the negotiations and kind of get it into the shop, and now it's launched, which is great. But it was real that kind of, I took a couple of weeks to carve these things in the hope that it would work, kind of believing in them. And that's where it was a bit of a leap of faith trying to do that. And that was a little bit different to kind of my normal receive a commission, carve it approach. And that's quite exciting. And that can just kind of tick alongside a little bit as well. And And then the only other thing recently is I've started a big project with Exeter Cathedral for something called it's called a misericord. So in the choir stalls, there's these seats which are a bit like, they're called flip-up seats. So it's where you would kind of perch during a really long service, and there's these medieval carvings under there, and they were made in 1250, so really, really old, and they're all still intact within reason. And the cathedral wants to do a big project funded by the National Lottery, and there's a heritage fund to get some modern ones. So they're building a new section of the cathedral which will display all sorts of things, and they're doing 4 new seats. And so as part of that, we're doing a big community project to design these new seats. So what would be kind of a modern take on these, and that's really different. I haven't done anything where I'm kind of involving the community in the design. I'll carve it, and also they'll come and do some clay modeling workshops and some carving workshops with me. But suddenly you've got this much wider reach for this project, and yeah, that's quite exciting. I'm enjoying that at the moment. That's not something I've done.
What's an example of a modern design that someone is bringing in to ask to, can you give us an example?
They're still coming in at the moment. What springs to mind? So these designs are quite medieval. They show scenes of daily life. The originals, maybe there's a mythical beast or centaur, or some kind of sometimes quite naughty ones, because you couldn't have anything religious kind of under your bum. But what springs to mind is St. George's Chapel, Windsor, did quite a similar project, which Zoe was part of, which was on the grotesques going around the church. They were trying to get these more modern grotesques or signs, and actually one of them was, do you know there was that mouse that had an ear grown on its back? You know, it was kind of like that scientific advancement. Do you see that? That was a number of years ago. And anyway, it was perfect because it showed modern day science, but also it was quite kind of grotesque and medievally. It was this really interesting kind of twist. But no, we've got some coming in at the moment, kind of scenes of daily life. But yeah, it's quite fun. What do you think about that Zoe St. George's project?
Yeah, that was nice. Yeah, that mouse is brilliant. It was it was like the first ear that was grown, like the cartilage structure. They grew it on the back of a mouse, so it had a blood supply. And the project was based on, they wanted the grotesques to be concerns or fears of our times, rather than being just copying other people's. So it was quite often that the grotesques on the outside would ward off evil, so that it didn't, penetrate through into the church. And I think it was really interesting hearing about what people's concerns and fears were. It was actually a competition at college. You could submit designs, and then certain designs were chosen to be carved and go on the chapel, which is amazing. Amazing link through the college.
Zoe, what do you think your well, I have two questions. Back to the nonlinear piece. Where would you like to see your stone carving go? Like, what are you dreaming about that's kind of away from what you've been working on? And two, well, it's kind of the same question. What do you see as of now, a crisis of our time that you would rope into your work or something, much like the ear on the mouse?
So I think, in fact, if I lead with that answer, because I did actually carve a gargoyle, one of my designs was chosen. And at the time, my husband was in the military and serving in Afghanistan whilst I was carving. And so that was very much, so for me, I actually carved his cat badge, which was an eagle and a laurel wreath. So it's like protecting its nest. Because I think for me, there was a really big uncertainty about, what that meant, what was going to happen, how safe he was, and all of those sorts of things. So that was where I was at that time. And, it's more stylized. I don't think it's quite as literal. It's not quite like heraldry. But that was an interesting piece to be carving. And kind of going back to what Will was saying about when he listens to a podcast and he can tell, I should think probably years later, he looks at it and remembers what the podcast was about. I very much feel with my work that, and maybe it's because it's in silence, I spend a lot of time kind of processing thoughts and emotions and all sorts of things whilst carving. And so each of my carvings I tend to name to do with how I was feeling during that period of carving it. And particularly if something's taking you 2 or 3 weeks to carve, you can nearly always look back and think, oh, there was a real theme over the last 3 weeks of me feeling like this or that thing happening in my life. And I think it's the idea that you, as a carver, I'm always a carver, whether I'm at home carving or whether I'm at home making dinner, I'm still a carver. And actually those things lead into your life, and it's okay to let them in. And it for me, I can look back and see the documentation, if you like, of the last few years of my life through my work. And I don't think necessarily a viewer would be able to do that, but I know it and I feel it. And I have found a couple of times people, when they've bought my work, have said, oh, I just really like it, just makes me feel X. And it's been incredibly close to what I was feeling at the time whilst making it.
That's
and
wild.
so I find that as quite a weird, and it's happened enough times now that it no longer surprises me when they say it. But it's a really nice thing, particularly if the person who buys your work feels it. That's that's really lovely. And in terms of where I'd like to see it go, I think I try and take on one of these like nonlinear things. I probably have a few too many going on at the moment. I think they're quite exciting. And I think it's exactly what Will's saying. You have to go with an idea that you think, oh, I think that would be great. And you have to just take a bit of a punt. And sometimes it doesn't work. And other times, like the perfume, it does. And those projects aren't necessarily the biggest money earners, but they're the things for me that I get really excited about. I've got another, I've started 3D scanning and printing my work. And so this one is a 3D print taken from a scan of a slightly larger piece. And the idea with this one, which is happening in about a week's time, which I'm really excited about, is I'm going to produce it at 8 centimeters. And we're then going to we're going to print the mold, and we're going to slip cast it, and then fire it and get to play with all sorts of colors and things that I don't normally get to, and sell it as a Christmas bauble, as a Christmas decoration. And that's it's clearly not carving because I've already done the work, but I'm really excited about this application and trying to utilize modern techniques like 3D scanning and printing, whilst creating, I guess it's almost like a passive income, because I'm not having to make the individual things. I can farm that out to somebody else to do. It means that I get to concentrate on the carving and support my business whilst doing that. I guess where would I really like to see I mean, I would love to have sort of gallery representation and be selling work to sort of collectors and I'm always sort of working towards that. I'd love to have a solo exhibition in London. That's my kind of like 5-year plan. But it's quite a balance, because you have to have a body of work to be able to take it to a gallery. And you don't always sell it, and a gallery might take 50% or 60% of a sale. And so there's this real balance of your bread and butter money with your rope knots and your commissions, but also carrying on being true to yourself and pursuing the things that really, that really make you excited.
You've queued up the question of thoughts on balancing craft with business and how to navigate that relationship. You've just said it. Will, how do you handle that balance?
Probably not as good as I can do, but it's getting a lot better. Yeah, it's kind of, it is a tricky balance. There's a lot of crafts. People find it just that you just want to be making, or you want to be carving, and I don't want to try and, it's just so much. We're both self-employed and haven't necessarily got employers as such, although we collaborate a lot. Which is brilliant, but it means that, you've got the other side of running the business, which can take over in the sense of you can sometimes get into a period and you're like, actually, I haven't carved in ages. What's going on? And you've got to just keep that balance going, which is where these other projects can be really nice, as Zoe was saying. Um, I haven't been doing it recently, but I've been doing quite a bit of teaching, and that again is a really lovely thing to do. Kind of beginner or introductory wood carving. It took me quite a while to start doing it because you feel like, oh gosh, I've haven't been carving that long. It's not fair. Like you know, who am I to be teaching? But actually, you would find after doing a course, like I'm sure a lot of the students there have done, you would know an awful lot more, and people are kind of really interested to try these things nowadays. But that was another lovely kind of bread and butter thing in the sense of the business. Um,
It was actually
yeah,
Will, you starting your courses that encouraged me to start my courses. I only started mine last year, but it was seeing you doing it on social media and stuff. I was like, oh, amazing. If Will's doing it, I wonder if I can do it.
just starting, isn't it? Starting and then you learn as you go into some degree. Um, but very much, yeah, the business side at the moment, it's kind of trying to take on the projects you would like to do as well, and getting to that stage does help quite a lot.
Mhm.
And really trying to keep a separation between um, kind of the work side of it, because when it's your craft and you love it, it just gets all blurred into daily life. You know, weekends I'd be sometimes working, and yeah, just because you kind of enjoy it, or yeah, you'd be doing that. We're very
Yeah.
lucky.
Our guests that are viewing this from afar, just now's your time. Give us your questions for Zoe and Will, and we're just going to keep talking through. So this all ties into the sort of like I would imagine is a really big moment in a craftsperson's career is you're chugging along, you don't say no, you know, you need to keep taking on as much project that's going to teach you and monetize your business. And when do you get to a point where you are comfortable saying no? And or maybe an easier way to say that is, what was the first project that you graced yourself with the ability to say no to?
I can't remember what the first one was. I very recently said no to a project, which was a chap emailed me saying, wonderful work. I'd like 2 serpents carved for my front door. Could you do that, please? And he wanted them about 2.5 foot tall or something. And it's a great commission. It's just not a great commission for me. And it's because of all the things we were saying about where I take joy from my work. And for me, that is not carving a serpent. And I think I mean, even through conversations like this, I mean, Will's opened my eyes to one of the reasons why I take joy from something that I maybe hadn't noticed. And I think it's starting to learn what things are going to make you happy to carve and what things are not. And there's a balance, isn't there, of how much money you have in your bank account as to how likely you are to say yes or no to that. And if you don't have much money, then you're more likely to say yes to those commissions because you just need to do them. And when you feel a little more successful, you're far more likely to say, do you know what, that's not in my wheelhouse at the moment, but my friend carves these, I'm going to recommend you speak to her, which is exactly what I did, and put him in touch with a fellow stone carver who carves beautiful animals, and it was probably a really exciting commission for her. But
Yeah,
it's a really
you do need to just say yes to a lot, don't you, when you start? You do, or you end up saying a lot of yeses, just to kind of get that variety and work coming in, really. And sometimes they can be, yeah, very strange projects. Or I tend to find, like, when someone wants me to carve their pet, it's just like, oh gosh, because like,
Oh,
you know, carving animals anyway is like you can figure it out and you can do the 3D stuff, but then it's specific to their pet, so it's just like, oh my. So I tend to kind of try and stay away. I mean, it's possible people can do it, but it's just very, very,
there's
very
a
small.
lot of money in pet portraits.
I know, right? It's just like, and yeah, knowing you can spread yourself a bit thin. Like Zoe's just like, yeah, made this just incredible um uh, kind of focus on her work as well, which does go in different directions, but within that theme. And that's just brilliant. So you do want to kind of hone your craft as well to a degree whilst keeping
I think
things.
mine also came from I was trying to make a website, and I realized if I was because I really liked head modeling as well, and I was like, well, if I'm doing portraiture, letter carving, sculpture, geometry. I was like, who am I? Like, how do you do that elevator pitch? And I just couldn't come up with like a tagline. And so the more I put sort of geometric patterns on my website, the more I could see that the other pieces didn't fit in. And so it's actually one of the ways I decide whether I'm going to say yes to a commission or not, is also whether it serves me on like social media and my website, and can I use the images, and is it something that I want somebody else to say, oh, I saw you carving that, could you carve me one? And if the answer to that is no, I'm far less likely to say yes to the commission, because it's taking me too far. I think it's really nice with commissions when they challenge slightly what you're doing and make you think about something in a new way. But if it's too far off piece, then for me it just doesn't really add to my.
I love that. What a great idea to just lay out all of your favorite things that have brought you joy to make, and just sort of inch away, you know, anything else. That's a really great way to hone your focus. I like that.
The most exciting bit for me definitely was when somebody commissioned me to make a geometric piece. And I suddenly was like, oh, I've made it. You know, it's not a random commission. It's somebody who's seen my work and they're commissioning something slightly different. And that was a really great moment, definitely.
Yeah. I just want to take a moment to mention that, Will, you're not in your workshop. You just had a family loss, and we're grateful that you're here, that you wanted to continue on with this program. And you're actually brought your work with you, which is something that you talked about earlier, how your practice is mobile. And that's one of the great things that you love about woodworking, and that you brought your work to your dad's workshop to finish up a carving. And we're just grateful that you stayed in the show. And I think you have one thing with you, right? Didn't you have one thing to share?
So yeah,
What is it?
my dad really sadly passed away last week, and yeah, luckily has a lovely workshop that I've been working in. Unfortunately, I had a really big deadline this week, so there's going to be a new bishop of the Isle of Man, and I'm carving her. It's called a crozier, but it's her big staff kind of. And yeah, she's having the big service soon, so she really needs it this week. So I've been carving actually quite a lot recently, but it's brought a lot of comfort to be in my dad's workshop. It's been so special being in there and being able to work. Quite tough, but yeah, kind of really good to do. I would be in there now, but the internet's awful, so I'm in here. I have got it here. It's in 3 sections, so because she's going to need to travel a lot, she couldn't take a full size. It's about 5'6". This is the top section, and I've used snooker fixings to connect the pieces. So this is inspired by an Isle of Man artist called Archibald Knox. So quite a Celtic theme. So it's got a middle section here, which is just a single pole. So this is in oak. And then the lower section, because she's currently in Westminster Abbey as a deacon there, or pastor there, the bottom section is quite traditional. So it's got a canthus leaf on the bottom, a bit of egg and dart, and then they just screw together.
That's
which is
amazing.
great. And if she wants to play some snooker with it, she can.
It'd be great
it all
if she could
fits
just
into
change
a
one
case.
out.
So I found
An
a nice
alternative
case.
end.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you're lucky to see this because that is off tomorrow being collected. So it's quite nice.
Wild.
Which is good.
It's really special that you're with us during this time, but also that you got to bring this practice with you and work out of your dad's shop. I mean,
Yeah,
that's unreal.
it's so versatile. That's the nice thing, you know. I when I heard I could chuck some chisels in a bag and my vise and the materials, and that's all I needed really. I just needed, as I'm sure a lot of the people there know, is you just need to be able to support your work well and work at it. But actually, for the surface area we need as carvers, it's not very much at all.
Mm-hmm. I have one last question for you both that we've already set this up, but I'd like you to answer for each other's work. What sets you apart from other craftspeople in your field? Zoe, what would you say about Will's work?
I think the Angels project probably was the main one that I think is really different for Will. And I think it's, I suspect it was the leap of faith to take his smaller version along to the shop, was just incredibly entrepreneurial and brave. And I think it takes a lot of confidence to do that, even if you're not feeling very confident. And I think it was an amazing way of showing that something can be available for sale but still be handmade. And I remember thinking it was really exciting from a fellow maker's point of view that you could have something in such a prestigious place and it still be Will making each one by hand. I thought that was really exciting. I mean, great that you've moved on to casts as well, but I remember that point thinking that Will was really, really going places.
Yeah, well, luckily they let me do it, which was really good. And yeah, I think for Zoe, the kind of the clear joy, I think, is it comes across in everything that she does. So I think it's very clear. Obviously, your social media side of things, you can see that is just so many people enjoy watching those, and it's kind of that a big change point, specializing into the geometric world, which has been really exciting, but also kind of a very clear ambassador for the craft. You can tell it's not just kind of trying to do it from that business side. It's actually taking people into the workshop, what's going on, how am I going to do this, kind of educating people as well, which I think is amazing and quite unique.
Thanks, Will.
Both of you have been so open, and you're so honest and open about your practice, and that's really valuable to us.
No worries.
A really interesting being involved as well. It's always nice chatting with Will, but it's lovely talking about craft in general.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much for your time, and thanks to our virtual guests for being here. And I hope you, Zoe and Will, I hope you have you're going to bed soon, I hope. I mean,
not quite. It's 8 p.m. here, so it's okay.
All right. Well, thank you for spending your evening with us, and we'll hopefully see you here in Boston someday.
I'd love that. That'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it in person next time.
Yeah. Thank you all, and have a good night.
Cheers. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.